You're listening to the Mind Over Murder podcast.
My name is Bill Thomas. I'm a writer, consulting producer, and now podcaster. I am now trying to use my experience as the brother of a murder victim to help other victims of violent crime. I'm working on a book on the unsolved Colonial Parkway murders, and I'm the co-administrator of the Colonial Parkway murders Facebook group together with Kristen Dilley.
My name is Kristen Dilley. I'm a writer, a researcher, a teacher, and a victims advocate, as well as the social media manager and co-administrator for the Colonial Parkway Murders Facebook page with my partner in crime, Bill Thomas.
Welcome to Mind Over Murder. I'm Kristen Dilley.
And I'm Bill Thomas.
We're having a grand old time over here recording a bonus episode for y'all. We hope you enjoy it.
On a Saturday morning, and it's 42 degrees here in Connecticut.
Oh, gosh.
Welcome to New England. It was 80 a few days ago, and this morning it was 41 when we got up, and now it's 42.
It was 90 here yesterday, real scorcher. It's about 70-ish right now. We had a massive thunderstorm overnight. So, yeah, it's the East Coast, baby.
Mm-hmm. A wide variance in temperature, I must say. Then you have this whole big discussion about, I put away all the storm windows and put up the screens and all that stuff because we were sweating bullets. And now we're having this debate about, do we turn the furnace back on?
Which you did.
Yes, but being the thrifty New Englander that I am, I was initially resistant.
We'll freeze to death instead. It'll be fine.
Yeah, exactly. We'll huddle next to this pile of twigs I've put in the fireplace. No, actually, as soon as the request came in, I said, yes, I'll run downstairs and turn on the furnace.
Well, and you also have a little dog that needs to be kept warm.
Yeah, but Oliver's got a fursuit on. He's warm all the time. But, then you hear the rumble from the basement and the sound of money going up the chimney. And I'm considering, closing all the storm windows and putting up storm doors and all that stuff.
Oh, the joys of owning a house/B&B. For those of you that don't know, Bill and his lovely partner, Pamela Arnois, do own a gorgeous B&B in Norfolk, Connecticut called the Maple House. So you guys are or are not taking guests?
We are not taking guests. We're still closed.
Okay, well, at some point or another, consider taking a trip up to Norfolk, Connecticut, the icebox of Connecticut.
It is beautiful. Absolutely gorgeous. Normally, if there is such a thing, we have beautiful, warm, sunny days in the summertime and cool nights, but not 41-degree cool. More like in the 50s. Good sleeping weather, as my mom used to say.
It is a very, very lovely place. And at some point or another, now that COVID is sort of lifting,
yes,
we are planning on getting together and recording episodes together as opposed to over Zoom. So that will be interesting.
Yes, exactly. And I'm looking forward to that, actually.
Yeah.
I'm going to come down to Virginia. You're going to come up to Connecticut. We're actually going to record face-to-face. It'll be really fun.
Yes, it's going to be great. Today, we're going to go ahead and answer some listener questions with regard to Ron Little and Liberty Security. And as always, we would like to start by stating that we are in no way accusing, implying, or inferring that Ron Little is in any way involved with the Colonial Parkway murders, nor are we implying, inferring, or suggesting, or accusing that anyone related to Liberty Security is responsible for the Colonial Parkway murders. We are just exploring the possibilities. Did I cover everything? Are there legal loopholes I need to try to fill?
Our lawyers would be very proud of you.
Wait, we have lawyers?
Yeah, you have to have lawyers to stay out of trouble. Next time we'll be reading some boilerplate language that legal counsel has put together for us. But I think you covered it beautifully.
Okay. All right. Well, we'll go ahead and start with some questions from our loyal listeners. Thank you to everybody who wrote in, and please do feel free to write in questions to us anytime. We are always happy to hear from you, and we will do our best to get your questions answered. So let's actually go ahead and start with something fairly simple. This one is from Laura Ann, and I know you have an answer to this one, Bill, so I'm looking forward to hearing what you have to say. Laura Ann asks, does anyone know what kind of vehicle Ron drove back then not a dark colored van by any chance. I think she's referring to Chris Call's close encounter on the Colonial Parkway with a van with the second part of that question.
We've seen photographs of the vehicle that Ron Little, who was the ostensible owner of Liberty Security, which later changed its name to Advanced Security. The car we've seen photographs of is a red Dodge Daytona. So it's a pretty distinctive car and definitely not a dark-colored van of the type that Chris Call saw on the Colonial Parkway the night his brother Keith and Cassandra Haley, Sandy, went missing.
Because I'm not a car person, what's a Daytona?
Well, these were smaller then. This is, remember, we're talking about late 1980s. This is sort of a small, sporty car, kind of wedge shape, not the big Dodge Daytonas that are on the road now, which are, again, quite popular. They've recycled the name. This was a small, probably made in Japan, actually, but just imported for Dodge. Kind of a sporty two-door, relatively cheaply made. Just doesn't look like a car they were making in the United States at the time. It's a late 80s little red Econobox with sporty pretensions. We can
Econobox, I love it.
We can find a picture of a Dodge Daytona, and heck, if we can find that picture we have of Ron Little's Dodge Daytona, we'll try to put that up.
All right, that sounds good. This one is from Colleen. Colleen asks, what is or was the opinion of locals on Liberty Security and its employees? Were they considered legit or shady? And she adds, there's always some truth to the local rumor mill.
Well, it's a little bit hard for us to answer. I guess we'd have to go back and ask some more people. I think the company Liberty Security, which was founded by John Knight, that's Knight, Hawthorne with an E at the end, was considered a legitimate company. They advertised a lot in local newspapers. They were always looking for security guards to work various shifts. They had a number of different clients whom they provided security services for. And most of this stuff's fairly low level. So these are not great jobs. So they were always looking for people. There was a fair amount of turnover. I think the company was regarded as legitimate. They provided security for Ames department stores, some grocery stores in the area. I believe Rose's as well.
Rose's.
They provided security for some of the Little Sioux convenience stores, which you know Little Sioux better than I do. I think of it as kind of a regional chain that is a 7-Eleven affair.
Yeah, maybe a little bit bigger than a 7-Eleven, but yeah, that's pretty much it. It is very regional.
I think where things get a little bit sketchier is from the many people we've talked to, there were a number of people that had less than stellar things to say about Ron Little in particular, who had moved to the United States from New Zealand via California, probably falsifying his records on the way into the United States. We've not heard anywhere near as many negative things about John Knight Hawthorne, the original owner of Liberty Security, and Ron Little. Little shows up all over this story of these unsolved murders, and we can talk about that in a minute. But I don't know that Liberty Security was necessarily looked upon with some skepticism so much as Ron Little was.
Yeah, that tracks with, I think, what we have heard. Let's see here. We've got a couple from our loyal listener, Robert Gray. Thank you, Robert. Did Liberty Security or Ron Little personally have any connection to Gloucester County PD, the National Park Service, or any other law enforcement agencies in the area?
Well, remember, Ron Little moved to the United States from New Zealand, so he spends his formative years, as they used to say, in New Zealand. The guy who has the connections to law enforcement is John Knight Hawthorne. Hawthorne was a former deputy sheriff in the Gloucester County Sheriff's Department, which in and of itself is, I don't think there's much way around this, back then was considered highly corrupt. They had a number of different very serious problems, I think, at the Gloucester County Sheriff's Department. Not implying that John Knight Hawthorne, who still lives in the area, had anything to do with that level of corruption or anything like that. But Hawthorne worked as a deputy sheriff for the Gloucester County Sheriff's Department and then left the department and established his private security company, Liberty Security. So, Robert, in answer to your question, the direct connection to law enforcement is through John Knight Hawthorne. Now, as we mentioned in a previous episode, we've received new information that the sale of Liberty Security to Ron Little and the name change to Advanced Security may be a so-called straw man purchase and sale. John Knight Hawthorne actually didn't sell the company outright, as we understand it, to Ron Little, but that he remained a silent partner. So those connections to law enforcement remained in place. People have asked us kind of a related question, which is, did Liberty Security provide any private security work for law enforcement? I would have to say we have not seen anything that would indicate as such. So to the second part of Robert's question about National Park Service or other agencies, not to our knowledge, I think is a fair answer.
And actually, this is tangentially related to that one. Did any former law enforcement officers from the area work at or have ties to Liberty Security?
Well, we've been told, but I can't confirm this, that some members of law enforcement may have worked moonlight shifts, that is, when they work a second job. Law enforcement, particularly back then, didn't pay particularly well, and so oftentimes law enforcement officers would take additional work, whether it would be working a second shift or even providing security in some capacity. It gets a little blended between when are they on duty and when are they off duty. Certainly, Fred Atwell has been mentioned to us. Of course, Fred's gone now, so we can't ask him the question. We understand that Fred Atwell may have worked moonlight shifts for Liberty Security and that there's a possibility that other law enforcement people and deputy sheriffs from the Gloucester County Sheriff's Department may have worked moonlighting shifts with Liberty Security.
And finally, also from Robert, did Liberty Security have any client sites that they guarded, it's in quotation marks, that were close to the Parkway, along the potential route Keith and Sandy may have been intercepted, or in close proximity to any other locations of interest in the Parkway cases? Good question.
You know the geography better than I do, Kristen.
Yes.
Of the client companies that we know about, Rose's, Ames, the Little Sioux, convenience stores, do you regard any of them as being fairly close to the Colonial Parkway specifically?
No, they're not.
Robert, you have to remember, the Colonial Parkway, just as a reminder, it's a 23-mile long ribbon of land, and it's National Park Service land. There's no commercial entities on the Parkway itself. And, of course, only 2 of the double homicides in the so-called Colonial Parkway murders actually are associated directly with the Colonial Parkway. That's Kathy Thomas and Rebecca Dowski, case number 1. And the disappearance of Keith Call and Cassandra Haley. Keith's car is found on the Colonial Parkway, although we don't even know if Keith and Sandy ever made it to the Parkway. His Toyota Celica is found there, as we've talked about. The other 2 cases are well off the Colonial Parkway. Case number 2, Robin Edwards and David Knobling, is all the way over at the Ragged Island Wildlife Refuge next to the James River Bridge. At the time, not a lot of commercial activity near there. I think there was a 7-Eleven, which may still be there.
Yeah, there is a gas station near there, but really that's pretty much the only commercial thing that would have been there then that is still there now. There is more commercial stuff recently, but certainly not back then. And
then the Interstate 64 incident with Anna Maria Phelps and Daniel Lauer, also there's no commercial entities there either because they've got the 2 rest stops on either side of Interstate 64. Law enforcement officials think that they stopped at the eastbound rest stop because that would have been in the direction of travel to Virginia Beach from Amelia County where they started from. And then the car is found on the opposite side rest stop. And you could run across from one side to the other. There's not much more than a grassy median with trees in the middle. But again, no commercial Nothing, as a matter of fact, no gas station, just...
Yeah, nothing. I mean, and even now, I actually had to drive up to New Kent the other day, and it is still very much like it's kind of a no man's land, because there are the two rest areas, but you would really have to go pretty far off the interstate to find even a gas station if you were, say, running out of gas or were in car trouble. It is very isolated out there for sure.
Sure.
And yeah, in relation to, was there a Little Sioux nearby? Was there Ames? Was there Roses nearby? There are not. No, those were over on like the Gloucester side, and the Colonial Parkway is not on the Gloucester side. To get to Gloucester, you have to cross the Coleman Bridge, and that is the opposite side of the river from the Parkway. Bill, exactly as you were saying, the Colonial Parkway there is nothing commercial around it. At the Yorktown end, now there's a nice little Riverwalk area where there's, restaurants and fun little places that you can go to, but that would not have been that built up back then. And on the Williamsburg end, near Jamestown, again, there's the Visitors Center and there's various commercial enterprises there now, but certainly nothing along the stretch of the Parkway. Because on one side of the Parkway, you have the river, and on the other side, you have Cheatham Annex. And there is absolutely no going on base without a permit. So you're really it's like you said before, you're kind of hemmed in once you're on the Parkway. Mm-hmm. There's no easy way to get off. And certainly there's nothing commercial along that stretch.
A good portion of the land along the Colonial Parkway, especially sort of in that middle section near Williamsburg, is federal property that belongs to the Navy for the most part, and is completely fenced in, as you're saying. Funny, when you're driving along the Colonial Parkway, you don't really notice, but if you actually stopped and walked a few hundred yards into the woods, in a number of examples, you would either run into the river, the York River in one spot and the James River, if I'm not mistaken, in the other.
Yes.
And or a chain link fence, which would be preventing you from going into Cheatham Annex or the Naval Weapons Station. And you're not really aware of it as you drive along because, remember, the road was built in the 30s and 40s as an attempt to kind of recreate an old-fashioned highway. So you don't pay a lot of attention. You're actually hemmed in on both sides. There may be things on the far side of the fence that are federal property, and there's some private property there as well. Mm-hmm. But no real businesses. The closest one I can come up with in terms of proximity to the Colonial Parkway itself would be if you went across the Coleman Bridge from York County into Gloucester County, where many of the people that we've talked about today are kind of headquartered. I think you might be able to get to that first Little Sioux convenience store / gas station maybe in 10 minutes or so. So it's not like
that sounds about right.
It's not eons away, but it's definitely not, right next door.
Yeah, exactly. And it's not some place that you're not going to get there relatively quickly. Like you said, it'll take you about 10 minutes and you've got to go through the toll and everything else like that. And there's bridge openings throughout the day. So it's not like you could jump in your car from Little Sioux and speed and get there in 10 minutes. Like all sorts of factors have to be working in your favor to get you across the bridge relatively quickly.
Easier in the middle of the night, obviously.
Yes.
Traffic is lighter and less bridge openings, and nothing is immediately proximate to any of the 4 sites where the cars or bodies were found.
And it has occurred to us that for anybody who's not familiar with the Parkway, the geography of it is definitely something that would need a little bit of explanation. So I think that here over the next couple of weeks, as things wind down with school, I am going to try to go through and just shoot some video so that people who are not familiar with the Parkway can get a sense of what it is like. It's got to be pretty hard for anybody who's not familiar with the area to understand what we're talking about.
And we did just put up a video. We don't know when it was shot, but fairly recently. And this guy, Chris, who travels the country and shoots interesting places and likes to shoot abandoned places and that sort of thing, did do a very nice 4-part video shoot where he showed the 4 sites from the Colonial Parkway. Interestingly, I'm not even sure, because you and I have done it, I'm not 100% sure how he gained access to all of those sites, but it appears he did, and we appreciate it. And so we'll link to those again, but those are definitely worth looking at as well. And this is one of the reasons that we run that map. I think it's from the Daily Press, if
it is.
Not mistaken. We run that map every once in a while because it is very helpful, particularly for those folks that are not from Virginia, which is an awful lot of you these days, to get a sense of where these places are in relation to one another. You're listening to Mind Over Murder. We'll be right back after these messages. One of the most frequent questions we're asked here at Mind Over Murder is, how can I help?
Thanks to Othram, a leading forensic DNA testing lab for law enforcement, you can get involved and help solve real cases.
If you have tested at a consumer genetics company, you can contribute your data to DNAsolves.com. The process is easy and confidential. Just 2 simple steps. Your DNA might be the missing piece that helps solve the identity of an unknown person.
Then Mind Over Murder will highlight cases Othram is working on to seek your crowdfunding support for DNA testing to help solve these cold cases.
Upload your DNA profile to DNAsolves.com. It's easy, free, and confidential.
Then join Mind Over Murder as we help families find answers with Othram and DNAsolves.com.
Welcome back to Mind Over Murder.
Bill and I, the times that we've had the good fortune to be together in the same location, we do tend to make a lot of runs out to these various sites, and we've had adventures at a number of them, including that awful trip out to New Kent where we both ended up covered in bugs.
Yeesh. And that wasn't the only time. There was another time, I won't mention all the particulars to maintain the identity of the innocent, the guilty, I don't know.
The other guilty party, who was not me.
We were out there in, I would call it the middle of the night.
At
least a half a dozen of us.
Yep.
And lights and a television crew. And there's talk amongst the crew and cast when you're setting up. It takes a while to march into the woods and set up the lights and all that kind of stuff. And so there's plenty of time to talk. And so people got into all sorts of conversations about, are there bears in Virginia? And what's the largest critter we could run into? And then, of course, we're standing in like waist tall grass when somebody starts talking about snakes. And you're getting increasingly freaked out, like,
yep.
What's out here? And then, of course, by the time we finish, it's very late. I went home to the hotel room and you're exhausted, but I decided wisely, it turned out, to take a shower before I went to bed because I was covered with ticks.
Ooh.
So really, it wasn't so much about bears and snakes. It was about ticks.
We do have bears and snakes. And actually, my parents rather recently found a bobcat on their back deck.
Yikes.
Yeah. It's good times over here in Virginia. Good times. All right. We have another question from Julie, who first remarked, crazy episode. Yes, Julie, you are right about that for sure.
Now, let's take that as a compliment, right? Thank you, Julie.
Yeah. And actually, Bill and I were surprised by the number of people who were commenting that, like, they thought they knew everything about this case, but they didn't know this.
We've got so much more.
Yeah. And it is like the number of twists and turns and weird characters in this case.
Yes.
They just keep on coming.
Yeah, there were times when we're just trying to sort out, how do we tell this part of the story? And again, as you said, we're not accusing anybody of anything. We're just raising some issues.
She does have I think, a fair point, and this is one we definitely can hash out. So the FBI stance is that they never had Liberty Security or Little on their radar, and he outed himself. I find that strange. After all the ties to Liberty and several of the victims, the FBI was not interested in him beforehand.
This is a little bit of a tough one to answer.
Yeah, it is.
Because we've had a lot of conversations with the FBI. I had a conversation at length with the new top dog agent within the last few days. But the FBI won't answer questions in a straightforward manner. All we can tell you is what they said publicly at the time that Ron Little was deported, which is August 1989. after Ron Little had written this letter that we featured publicly, they said that he was not a suspect in the Colonial Parkway murders or any of the other, what have you been calling them, Colonial Parkway murders adjacent?
Yes, Colonial Parkway murders adjacent cases.
For instance, Brian Pettinger and Lori Ann Powell, their individual murders, both of whom worked for Liberty Security. The FBI said publicly that he was not a suspect and that the only person who was naming him as a suspect was Ron Little himself. Now, as I've said, as the brother of a murder victim, who's one of the people that's sadly mixed up in this thing, I still am baffled by the Immigration and Naturalization Service's decision to deport Little in August 89 when he does seem to have inserted himself into any number of these unsolved murders and disappearances. I still feel it's very odd that they shipped him back to New Zealand.
Yes.
Knowing what I know about how thorough the FBI can be, I have to believe they took a look at him and others who were involved with Liberty Security in one way or another as potentially being involved in the Colonial Parkway murders. But you notice I'm parsing my words very carefully here because we just don't know. And you can ask straightforward questions all day, but I can't get straightforward answers unless someone from the Bureau is willing to say so. And it's kind of culturally alien to them to just answer questions about an open case like this.
You know, and as Jim Fitzgerald was saying, we did read an email last episode in which he contributed his thoughts on people who insert themselves into investigations. Fitz does acknowledge that, yes, there are serial killers who do this, and they do it to get their rocks off or to get their jollies or whatever you want to call it. He did say that more often than not, people who tend to do this are doing it for attention. And maybe I've got more faith in the FBI than I ought to have. I kind of have to believe that if the FBI were willing to deport him out of the country, they had to have considered, is this guy a real suspect or is he just blowing smoke? I get the feeling they wouldn't have let him go if they thought he was a threat. But as you pointed out, Bill, we don't know what the FBI actually does behind the scenes. They don't answer these questions. So maybe I'm putting more faith in the FBI than is warranted. I feel like they wouldn't have let him go if they felt there were substantial links. On the other hand, though, Julie, I see your point. He is linked to a lot of people. It's very odd.
And he inserted himself in a very odd way. And, of course, Ron Little's not the only person that did this. Fred Atwell definitely inserted himself in the Colonial Parkway murders. I mean, tons of outreach to me. I talked to Fred Atwell over the phone countless times, as did Joyce Call Canada. And we both always felt, as we discussed a few weeks ago, that Atwell knew more. And, of course, Atwell is also a former deputy sheriff for the Gloucester County, Virginia Sheriff's Department, as is Steve Blackman, whose name has come up a few times, more than a few times in relation to this case. And again, we're not saying any of these people are involved, but the names come up over and over again. Other people whom I don't know the names of these particular individuals, I remember Crosby Brackett, who was an FBI agent who handled the case for a number of years. Very, very capable investigator and a very nice guy. But I remember him telling us a story about how someone came in and confessed to being involved in the Colonial Parkway murders. And Crosby was telling me this story, and I think I've mentioned this before. It had to be on a Friday afternoon. So this guy comes in and they're interviewing him because they really do take a hard look at anybody who comes in with credible information about these cases. And they were asking him questions, and this guy was saying he was involved in some or all of the murders. I don't have all of the detail, but then ultimately they got into questions involving what they call the holdbacks. These are the details that they don't tell the public and don't allow to appear in media reporting if they can help it, so that these details would be the things that only someone who was there would know. He started to get tripped up on those details, and so they ultimately decided late Friday, he he said they blew right through dinner and just kept right on going because they thought there's a possibility here. It does appear that in our case, as Jim Fitzgerald was saying, people do insert themselves into these cases and have inserted themselves into the Colonial Parkway murders investigation.
It is just such a well-known local case. When I first started talking to Bill, I remember telling him that a teacher at my high school, whose name I will not name, was very interested in the case and that he had given us packets of articles about this. And when Bill asked who the teacher's name was and I gave it to him, he said, "Oh yeah, the FBI has looked at him." And it blew my mind. But then, as you said before, Bill, there have been 150 different suspects at various times in the Colonial Parkway murders case. And I'm sure any number of them have done exactly what that guy did who went to Crosby Brackett. They've implied involvement. They've out and out stated that they were involved. I get the feeling this is what you get with a lot of high-profile cases. I mean, after all, how many books are out there from people who said, "Oh, my parent was the Zodiac. My brother was the Zodiac."
Right.
It happens with so many high-profile cases. And I think certainly it is very, very well known locally. And I get the feeling that there are any number of people out there who, for a couple of minutes in the sun, would have no problem saying, "Hey, I was a part of it," or "My uncle was a part of it," or "My
we've heard
fill
of
in
that
the blank."
dozens of times. I've had 2 or 3 people come to me in the last
week or two, right?
Yeah. I was going to say the last 2 or 3 weeks. I've had a couple of different people come to me with my uncle was involved. Mm-hmm. My former boyfriend was involved. And then I had another person who went into incredible detail about how a relative was involved. And then when I reached out to him, this guy backed off. I assume it's a guy. This guy backed off big time. Mm-hmm. In this case, he was commenting on a forum, and I asked him some questions, and I said, "Would you be willing to talk to me?" Because I wanted to introduce him to the investigators. And all of a sudden, he's like, stammering basically, didn't want to talk to me, didn't want to be interviewed by one of the FBI investigators, said he did, but then when I said, "Well, I can facilitate that," all of a sudden he's backing up. He actually had the nerve to say to me online, "Oh, can you arrange to have my DNA," because this would be a blood relative of his, compared against evidence in the Colonial Parkway murders? And of course I can't do that. That's a decision that law enforcement has to make. When I said I could facilitate an introduction, which of course we're always interested in doing, putting them together with the investigators, only they can evaluate whether someone is for real or not. All of a sudden, he was backing up and, unwilling to talk to me, unwilling to talk to the FBI. Then he starts taking down his original comments, and all of a sudden, he's like nowhere to be found. So in that example, the guy clearly wasn't credible. He'd gotten a little ahead of himself, I think. And, then he mentioned, "Oh, I was under the influence of sleeping medication and I had too much to drink." And it's like, okay, so you bragged that your relative was involved, but when someone who actually knows something about the case starts asking some questions and is sincerely interested in putting you in touch with the investigators, all of a sudden you've got nothing to say. These other two, they actually came forward just in the last couple of weeks, and they honestly thought they had something worthwhile to say. And if they do, we'll put them in touch with the appropriate people and let the law enforcement investigators evaluate whether they've got something worthwhile. But this idea of insertion, we've seen it numerous times.
And for every helpful and well-meaning person who does come forward and say, "Hey, I have some information, I think this might be helpful," we do get those couple of, I'm trying to put this really politely, I guess I'm just going to go with crackpots.
Okay, crackpots.
We do have, a couple of crackpots who will do exactly what this guy did with Bill and do it for notoriety, I guess.
Yeah.
And, I can't think of I can't think of any other motivation for doing that, especially when you're in touch with family members and getting their hopes up.
Yeah.
It's a very odd thing.
Back to that teacher you mentioned, remember, this is years ago now, We had a whole bunch of his former students.
Yes, we did.
On a forum discussing it. And they were like, Mr. So-and-so is involved in the Colonial Parkway murders. And people told different versions of the stories that you knew about. He did have a lot of very odd habits. And he did. Had shown an inordinate amount of interest in the Colonial Parkway murders and some other very dark stories.
You know, this is a guy who, one of the other things that he gave us in class to read was an article that he had written about going to witness an execution here in Virginia, which is perfectly fine, I suppose, if that's what you want to do. But he gave us that. And then he did write to Charles Manson, and he got a 12-page rambling, incoherent, bizarre response from Manson, which I still have, which is really I went a little Jim Fitzgerald on it and sat there and tried to comb through it and figure out all the various things I could get out of it. I didn't get very far.
But he had basically corresponded.
He did. He corresponded
with Charles
with
Manson when Manson was in prison.
He did.
Manson wrote him back a handwritten letter, if I recall.
It was handwritten, and then this teacher typed it up and gave us and keep in mind, too, I don't remember what lesson that was supposed to be. This was not a criminology class. This was not a criminology class in any way, shape, or form. So I don't really know. I don't remember what lesson he was trying to serve with that particular piece.
This is in high school.
This was high school. This was my senior year of high school. I mean, he is, this teacher, he recently passed away. Very good guy in a lot of ways, very interesting and inspirational teacher. A lot of people remember him with fondness for various reasons, others of which I'm not going to get into right now. Maybe not the best guy in the entire universe. And certainly had an inordinate amount of interest in the case, which did lead students, a lot of former students, to posit both online and in person.
Right.
I wonder if he's involved,
with
the case. And ultimately, other people at the school, other faculty members have always said, no, that's crazy. He isn't that kind of person. He's interested, but he's not involved. And, granted, as they worked with him, one-on-one and would have known him better, I'm not going to sit here and dispute them when they say that, because they would have known him better than his students, probably. But it was very interesting the day that we had that conversation and you acknowledged that the FBI had taken a look at him. That just blew my mind.
No, they actually did go and meet with him, and investigators did sit down with him because it sort of generated enough community interest at the time, that it wasn't just the rumor mill. I mean, it actually began to build on itself, and investigators, being thorough, actually did sit down with him and interviewed him regarding this high level of interest in the unsolved Colonial Parkway murders.
And I know for a while we did have another private investigator who was very interested in this.
Yes.
And who was absolutely sure he had some involvement in the case.
Yeah.
I don't know. I can't say. But, again, this case is populated with very, very interesting and colorful characters, and we're really only just scratching the surface here.
Right.
That's going to do it for this bonus episode of Mind Over Murder. If you have questions about any aspect of this case that you are burning to have answered, please send them to us via social media or our webpage. We are happy to answer questions. We love answering questions. Please do send those thought-provoking and interesting questions to us, and we'll do more bonus episodes for you just like this. Thank you so much to everybody who asked questions today. So Julie, Colleen, Robert, Laura Ann, we really appreciate it. Please do keep asking those questions. We love hearing from you. That's going to do it for this episode of Mind Over Murder. We'll see you next time. Mind Over Murder is a production of Absolute Zero and Another Dog Productions.
Our executive producers are Bill Thomas and Kristen Dilley.
Our logo art is by Pamela Arnois.
Our theme music is by Kevin MacLeod.
Mind Over Murder is distributed in partnership with Crawlspace Media.
You can follow us on Facebook, Twitter, or Instagram.
You can also follow our page on the Colonial Parkway Murders on Facebook.
And finally, you can follow Bill Thomas on Twitter at BillThomas56.
Thank you for listening to Mind Over Murder.